Hey everyone, Duke Nuka 3D here,
Hello.
and today we have for you a mask that I basically know nothing about. Moulage knows more about it than me, but I can kind of fill in with the more physiological, mechanical details of it, because today we have for you the Estonian E.III, more commonly known as the ARS-41, but that is not the correct designation. Anyone who uses that is entirely wrong. You fill us in a bit on the history of this, because I think you're covering that department.
So this is the Estonian E.III. It is, it was their service respirator going into the 1940s. I've seen some as early as 1937. It's called the ARS-41 in some circles because it was made in an Estonian factory called Arsenal, and often you'll see ARS-41. People assume it's like the French apparatus respiratory special, and so they say it's an ARS-41, which is incorrect. It's a pretty close, kind of 50-50 copy of the Finnish M30 and the British Mark IV.
Which I will bring that out for comparison, and I'll do more in-detail comparisons in the later part of the video. But as you can see, both are sort of a loose clone of the British General Service respirator, having similar eyepieces, rubber content, and just basically the construction principles. But there are a few different things in the valve arrangement and the hose placement, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. They are very similar, though, you have to admit. The Estonian just has an exposed exhale valve. The one interesting thing is that this is actually 42 millimeters here. Filter is a straight shank filter, but this connection for some reason is 42. I blame the Czechoslovakians.
Meanwhile, the M30, as you can see, has a fully removable hose. This is also 42 millimeter.
No, it's 40.
Oh, interesting. So that's definitely different.
Yeah, that's the weird thing.
And then obviously the exhale valve is not exposed, but it is integral inside a integral sort of hidden pocket in the rubber and is vented down at the chin. I'm sure Moulage has already done a review on the M30, so this is more...
Yeah, but that's basically, I believe it's a primitive but very effective way to keep the valve from fogging, is you basically build up a pocket
from
of
frosting, yeah.
Yeah, you build up a pocket of warm air in there, and then it's fine.
And meanwhile, the Estonian is not really facing as harsh of winters as the Finnish. Didn't really need to add that feature.
I mean, their winter still probably sucked.
They did, but this was probably just easier for them to mold and manufacture.
Yeah. Overall, the entire... We'll look at the filter first before we get to the innards.
Before we get to that, though, we need to talk about the carrier, which is a pretty basic sort of... It's actually backwards. I believe it's supposed to go this way, sort of like an SBR-style carrier, a small box respirator, where it's worn with the blank side out front and the snaps facing in towards the chest. Don't quote me on that. And this would have been probably carried at the side. It also uses buckles vaguely reminiscent of the British Mark IV General Service respirator carrier. A lot of this is just really closely entwined with the Mark IV design.
There's even a spring down in the bag right here for the filter to support it off there.
And there's a small pocket here, which I would assume would be for probably maybe some sort of anti-dimming cloth. I don't really think a decon kit would fit in here. It's kind of small, but who knows? I don't know what Estonian decontamination procedures and accessories are like. This is presumably a belt loop, although I'm not entirely sure, but that's the more likely scenario. It has two dot-style fasteners to open it. One is unfortunately torn off, but is present, more or less. And then inside, if I can show the inside. Do you mind helping me with that?
Yeah, let me get this side.
So you can hopefully, oh my goodness, that's going to be hard to see. There's a spring down in this section, similar to the small box respirator, that would help support the canister and so on and so forth. Nothing really to see there. There's an internal divider. And the only marking on the carrier is a serial stamp and a couple other faded stamps, which I can't make out, which are right there. You got a, I think that's a T859 or 0. I'm not wearing
glasses, so I can't.
Yeah, so I can't really comment on that, but let's get into the filter, which this is probably one of the biggest filters I've ever handled. This is a very bold... I'm told that this was like after Soviet occupation, but I'm not entirely sure.
This is the same design. For what I've heard from one Estonian collector that I talked to, is that obviously they were invaded in 1940, but production of certain military items continued with the Soviet permission. However, this is identical to the earlier 1930s filters used with the mask.
As you can see on the canister end, it is stamped ARS-41, indicating manufactured by Arsenal in 1941, and you got a production lot code or serial number on top there. And you can see how the canister is fixed with some twine and probably some cement inside the hose. And the canister, as you can see, is still plugged with presumably some sort of cardstock or fiberboard plug with a string. And you would pull on that string to undo it, but we're not going to do that because that would ruin the historical value. And now we can remove the canister entirely, but before we do, I will show off the threads, because both the M30, or it's M30, right?
Yes.
Yes, M30 and the E.III both have these very overbuilt, highly machined threads. And I'll give you an example of the E.3s here, which have some nice knurling on them. Just one, like, just solid machined metal. No stamped parts like the Soviet hoses or anything like that. It's just...
Yeah, these beat the shit out of the Soviet ones.
Yeah. So, bringing the... I might as well remove the M30's hose as well, just to show off the differences.
I really like the M30 hose, not gonna lie.
Yeah, the M30 hose is nice. So,
Let's take this one off for you.
that's another thing to point out, is that the harness does have a single hook and D-ring for loosening the entire assembly while keeping it adjusted to the closed position. It has a nice leather head pad, whereas the M30 has a more simplistic sort of sewn together arrangement of elastic. Not really spectacular, but it does its job. And inverting the harnesses, you can really see the likenesses of the two face pieces on the interiors, as they are both made out of a very high quality and flexible soft orange rubber, like the British General Service respirators. And you can see a little lower. And you can see how the outlet valves, tilted a little bit upwards, are similarly fastened in with threaded rings. And the main and pretty much only difference is the fact that the M30 has TISO deflectors, whereas the E.III does not. It just comes in at the chin, and
It just goes right up through there.
yeah, it just goes right up through there. Doesn't really need anything more than that. But lenses are overall the same. The cut is pretty much the same as well, other than the molding on the front. And just overall, you can see how they were patterned off of each other. Hell, it might even be the same, or at least a very similar outlet valve on the inside as well. I couldn't really say for sure, but it definitely seems like a similar diameter.
Yeah, I'd agree. This one, the exhale valve on it doesn't really work. I haven't been able to take this cover off, and I don't really want to because of how rare this is. But functionally they're very similar, and they make a really nice set side by side.
Yeah, and they're definitely a very interesting mask to handle. You don't really, again, they're very uncommon here in the States, and whenever they do come up for sale, they fetch outrageous prices.
Yeah,
and in fact,
fucking expensive. We're not going to say the price on screen.
That's fair, yes, but just know that these typically go for really egregious prices when they are sold. Even though they do pop up from time to time, they're not, like, impossible to find. They're just overpriced a lot.
I mean, I know of one website that has 2 or 3 for sale, and yeah, I'm not going to name it, but yeah, if they're out there, you really, if you want to find them, you can. Just be prepared to pay. It's
just really interesting to just note that it isn't a British-made design, but there's just so much that it has that's the same as British masks. Like, for instance, leaving the wire completely exposed, but only covering a patch of it where the twisted wire is, and just the way they arrange the stockinette and the lenses and the rubber, just even the buckles, how they do the buckles is just extremely British in principle, how it just, it loops through a small ring on the mask and then just kind of adjusts from the elastic. Overall, very British.
But despite that, it's a good mask.
It is. And that's really all I have to say on it, unless you had any final points. I don't really have anything else that I could offer, other than the neck strap, as you can see, is kind of getting in the way.
No, that's really it. I think we covered it fairly well.
Sometimes these could be found with chin canisters, is one thing I forgot to mention, but I'm not sure how accurate that configuration is. Maybe it was a civil defense thing. Not entirely sure.
I've seen that more with M30s, but yeah.
Yeah, I have seen a few of these with chin canisters, though, just for the record.
I mean, no, I believe you, and it's entirely possible. And it makes sense, because that's definitely part of why they have the hose, is so they can have a larger war gas filter, because the one on the Finnish M30 is usually a pretty big filter. But you'll see them with chin filters from the M38, because, obviously the situation changes, charcoal gets more efficient, and then you don't need the entire hose.
Pretty much. So, that being said, I think this is where we can wrap up the review. If the carrier would just sit on the table as intended, and I don't think it will, so I'm just going to put it back there. And that's all I have to say. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, we probably don't care, and we will look for outside sources. If you have any sort of information that actually contests what we've studied.
If you're Estonian and you collect masks, please talk to us.
Yes, if you're not, if you're just a random kiddo wanting to orbit us, we really don't want your input. See ya!